Hey, how are you? This will be leadership book, Northouse for Liberty University, Doctor of Strategic Leadership. This is Chapter 2, Trait Approach. Of interest to scholars throughout the 20th century, the trait approach was one of the first systematic attempts to study leadership. In the early 20th century, leadership traits were studied to determine what made certain people great leaders. The theories that were developed were called great man theories because they focused on identifying the innate qualities and characteristics possessed by great social, political, and military leaders. Catherine the Great, Mohandas Gandhi, Indira Gandhi, Abraham Lincoln, Joan of Arc, and Napoleon Bonaparte. It was believed that people were born with these traits and that only the great people possessed them. During this time, research concentrated on determining the specific traits that clearly differentiated leaders from followers. In the mid-20th century, the trait approach was challenged by research that questioned the universality of leadership traits. In a major review, Stockdale in 1948 suggested that no consistent set of traits differentiated leaders from non-leaders across a variety of situations. An individual with leadership traits who was a leader in one situation would not be a leader in another situation. Rather than being a quality that individuals possess, leadership was reconceptualized as a relationship between people in a social situation. Personal factors related to leadership continued to be important, but researchers contended that these factors were to be considered as relative to the requirement of the situation. The trait approach has generated much interest among researchers from its explanation on how traits influence leadership. For example, Kirkpatrick and Locke in 1991 went so far as to claim that effective leaders are actually distinct types of people. Lord De Vader and Alliger in 1986 found that traits were strongly associated with individual perceptions of leadership. More recently, Den and Lord in 2012 examined the relationship between leadership effectiveness and followers' perception of leadership traits. The trait approach has earned new entrants through the current emphasis given by many researchers to visionaries and charismatic leadership. Charismatic leadership catapulted to the forefront of public attention with the 2008 election of the United States' first African American president, Barack Obama, who is perceived by many to be charismatic among many other attributes. In a study to determine what distinguishes charismatic leaders from others, Jung and Sosik in 2006 found that charismatic leaders consistently possess traits of self-monitoring, engagement in impression management, motivation to attain social power, and motivation to attain self-actualization. In short, the trait approach is alive and well. It began with an emphasis on identifying the qualities of a great person, shifted to include the impact of situations on leadership, and currently has shifted back to re-emphasize the critical role of traits in effective leadership. Although the research on traits spanned the entire 20th century, a good overview of this approach is found in two surveys completed by Stockdale in 1948 and 1974. In his survey, Stockdale analyzed and synthesized more than 124 trait studies conducted between 1904 and 1947. In his second study, he analyzed another 163 studies completed between 1948 and 1970. By taking a closer look at each of these reviews, we can obtain a clearer picture of how individual traits contribute to the leadership process. Stockdale's first survey identified a group of important leadership traits that were related to how individuals in various groups became leaders. His results show that an average individual in a leadership role is different from an average group member with regard to the following 8 traits: intelligence, alertness, insight, responsibility, initiative, persistence, self-confidence, and sociability. The findings of Stockdale's first survey also indicated that an individual does not become a leader solely because that individual possesses certain traits. Rather, the traits that leaders possess must be relevant to situations in which the leader is functioning. As stated earlier, leaders in one situation may not necessarily be leaders in another situation. Findings showed that leadership was not a passive state but resulted from a working relationship between the leaders and other group members. This research marked the beginning of a new approach to leadership research that focused on leadership behaviors and leadership situations. Stockdale's second survey established in 1974, analyzed 163 new studies and compared the findings of these studies to the findings he had reported in his first survey. The second survey was more balanced in its description of the role of traits in leadership, whereas the first survey implied that leadership is determined principally by situational factors and not traits. The second survey argued more moderately that both traits and situational factors were determinants of leadership. In essence, the second survey validated the original trait idea that a leader's characteristics are indeed a part of leadership. See how far we go. Yeah, we'll do this. Similar to the first survey, Stockdale's second survey identified traits that were positively associated with leadership. The list included the following 10 characteristics: drive for responsibility and task completion, vigor and persistence in pursuit of goals, risk-taking and originality in problem-solving, drive to exercise initiative in social situations, self-confidence and sense of personal identity, willingness to accept consequences of decision and action, readiness to absorb interpersonal stress, willingness to tolerate frustration and delay, ability to influence other people's behavior, and capacity to structure social interaction systems to the purpose at hand. Cool. 625. Mann in 1959 conducted a similar study that examined more than 1,400 findings regarding traits and leaderships in small groups, but he placed less emphasis on how situational factors influence leadership. Although tentative in his conclusions, Mann suggested that certain traits could be used to distinguish leaders from non-leaders. His results identified leaders as strong in the following 6 traits: intelligence, masculinity, adjustments, dominance, extroversion, and conservatism. Lord and others in 1986 reassessed Mann's 1959 findings using a more sophisticated procedure called meta-analysis. Lord and others found that intelligence, masculinity, and dominance were significantly related to how individuals perceive leaders. From their findings, the authors argued strongly that traits could be used to make discriminations consistently across situations between leaders and non-leaders. Both of these studies were conducted during periods in American history where male leadership was prevalent in most aspects of business and society. In Chapter 15, we explore more contemporary research regarding the role of gender in leadership, and we look at whether traits such as masculinity and dominance still bear out as important factors in distinguishing between leaders and non-leaders. Yet another review argues for the importance of leadership traits. Kirkpatrick and Locke in 91 contended that it is unequivocally clear that leaders are not like other people. From a qualitative synthesis of early research, Kirkpatrick and Locke postulated that leaders differ from non-leaders on 6 traits: drive, motivation, integrity, confidence, cognitive ability, and task knowledge. According to these writers, individuals can be born with these traits. They can learn them or both. It is these 6 traits that make up the right stuff for leaders. Kirkpatrick and Locke asserted that leadership traits make some people different from others, and this difference should be recognized as an important part of the leadership process. In the 1990s, researchers began to investigate the leadership traits associated with social intelligence, which is characterized as the ability to understand one's own and others' feelings, behaviors, and thoughts and act appropriately. That's Marlowe in 1986. Zuccaro in 2002 defined social intelligence as having such capacities as social awareness, social acumen, self-monitoring, and the ability to select and enact the best response given the contingency of the situation and social environment. A number of empirical studies show that capacities to be a key trait for effective leaders. Zuccaro and Kemp and Bader, 2017, included such social abilities in the categories of leadership traits that they outlined as important leadership attributes. It's in the table in the book. Table 2.1 provides a summary of the traits and characteristics that were identified by researchers from the trait approach. It illustrates clearly the breadth of traits related to leadership. Table 2.1 also shows how difficult it is to select certain traits as definitive leadership traits. Some of the traits appear in several of the survey studies, whereas others appear only in one or two studies, regardless of the lack of precision in Table 2.1. However, it represents a general convergence of research regarding which traits are leadership traits. What then can be said about trait research? What has a century of research on the trait approach given us that is useful? The answer is an extended list of traits that individuals might hope to possess or wish to cultivate if they want to be perceived by others as leaders. Some of the traits that are central to the list include intelligence, self-confidence, determination, integrity, and sociability. And that's all on the table. Cool. We'll leave it right there. That is starting off on page 19 and going to page 23. And it'll go into the next section, intelligence. All right. See ya.